It's a great honor, great pleasure to have you here. And let me start from the very beginning. You said once a month, the sky falls on my head, and then I see what should be the next movie I should do. What was the beginning of Why We Hate story for you when you decided, yeah, I want to be involved in that project?
Well, you know, I've been dealing on the subject of hate for many years, ever since the founding of the Shoah Foundation, where we collected 52,000, videotaped testimonies of Holocaust survivors. So I have been in the business of discovering why we hate, and so beyond the work of the Shoah Foundation of preserving these testimonies and allowing these witnesses to become teachers of Generation X and subsequent generations, I had an idea when David Zaslav approached me, and he's a friend of mine, but he also runs the Discovery Channel. And he came to my office just for a social meeting, but he asked me if you could do anything on my channels, what would that be? And I swear to you, it came out of my mouth with no forethought. I said, I'd love to see a long series, critical study of hate. And I even said, and I think we should call it Why We Hate. And that's how the whole thing was born.
A lot of people think that you are the most important documentarian of our time. So it's pretty important what story you will choose for your next project. What was the beginning for you?
The beginning for me was a phone call from Steven Spielberg. And I can remember standing on a rock 2 miles off the coast of Maine as Steven, talked about how important this was, and I couldn't have agreed more. I mean, this is the central issue of our time. So, of course, Steven Spielberg calls number one. Number two, it's the most important thing on the planet, and so I jumped in.
All human beings have the capacity to hate, but what provokes feelings of hate or pushes us to commit acts of violence?
The seeds of our psychology is really built to look for threats. My childhood memories are standing on a picket line telling people they were going to hell.
What is it that turns hate into mass murder?
I think we see such an upsurge of extremism and ideology. We used to think it's something from the past. And what's your answer? Why it's happening these days? We thought it's over, but it's not, definitely.
Well, it's never been over, and the past has always been repeated. And, genocide upon genocide followed the lessons of the Holocaust, where we thought that never again actually meant never again, but it keeps happening again and again. And so we just don't learn the lessons from history. People today, through social media, tend to be more concerned about what's happening in the now and in the morrow, on the morrow, but not so much what happened even last week. And so these are hard lessons to learn, but I was just hoping, and I really wanted to work with the Martin Scorsese of documentaries, and Alex to me is the Marty Scorsese of documentaries, and he brought so much of his wisdom and such a great team. He put, with Gita and Sam, he put together this team that was really able to produce a series that I think promotes critical thinking.
There are some experts on the series that you're using expression perfect storm, combination of extremism, ideology, and social media and the internet. Maybe this is the reason why it looks so bad these days. It wasn't possible before that the fake news is spread around the world in a blink of an eye.
Well, let's face it. I mean, I think, as Steven says, hate has always been with us and always be in some form. But I think one of the things we're seeing now is the rapidity with which it can spread as a result of the social media platforms. Now, the internet is a force for great good. It brings us together. But it's also a force which encourages and provokes our sense of tribalism, and it does it in the blink of an eye, and it reaches in at an emotional level. So that, I think, is one of the things that is different today.
Can you share with us your personal story with the hate you encountered in your life, and how did it change your way of thinking, if it happened?
Well, being Jewish and being raised initially in an area where there weren't a lot of Jews, New Jersey was fine. I had no problem with New Jersey. And then I moved west and I encountered anti-Semitism as an elementary school student in my school. several schools. Not widespread and not throughout the entire school, but just small pods of popular kids that would pick on, you know, less popular kids. In my case, zero popularity growing up. And so I did have, and that, I didn't think of it as hate, I just thought of it as shame. I felt ashamed of a lot of things, and they actually managed with enough chiding and bullying to make me actually feel ashamed of being Jewish. I felt very much like an outcast, and as I got older, I realized that bullying is a very pervasive tool to make other people feel like they're in power. And so I was on the other receiving end of people's, you know, power trips. And that was my main experience with being hated for something that I had no control over, and something that inside me I've always been very proud of, to be Jewish.
Now I realize, you know, because I was so mean, I did gain respect from people, but not in a good way. And so I decided to change. But I feel really bad of myself, you know, and embarrassed to kind of say, wow, did I really do that?
So in thinking about how humans are capable of love and hate, the question then becomes, what pushes us one way or the other? Are we guided by our sense of what is right and wrong? Is this something that's also evolved? Or is it instead that we're shaped to be moral by our surroundings?
What was the most moving story for you from this documentary? Which personal testimony you recorded?
For me, it was the story about Cambodia. And the reason was that you had a very powerful person who spent a great deal of time spending not so much time with the victims, but with the people who perpetrated that great atrocity that was the Khmer Rouge's attack on its own people. But to understand the banality of it was really the shocker for me, because I think we get used to the idea that in the world there are good people and there are bad people. And then what you see is that actually there are people, and under certain circumstances, hate comes to the fore and it gets systematized in a way that overtakes us all. So it could happen anywhere. And that was, to me, the revelation of that particular episode, that it overtook the country in a way that was completely unexpected because normal people were in charge.
Well, look, people who perpetrate evil do not view themselves as monsters. You know, they don't have that point of view. You know, the perpetrators of great evil, you know, until they're caught, while they're in the process of mass murder, it is the banality of evil. It's an industry. The Holocaust and other genocides have been industrialized, especially the Holocaust, where so many lives could be taken so quickly. In such massive quantities. It was a business. It was a business of death. It was run like you would run a steel factory, or you would run a mill of some kind, and it was perceived by the perpetrators as being, normal.
Adolf Eichmann was the chief architect of what was known as the final solution, the Nazis' final solution, their project to eliminate the Jews. What people expected was to see a monster, but actually what they saw was someone who looked sort of frighteningly normal.
Ich hatte an keine blutige Lösung gedacht und nicht an eine solche gewaltsame Lösung gedacht.
And in many ways that was more shocking. The idea that the perpetrators of evil, the people who had been at the forefront and driving the Holocaust, were people just like you and I.
What this series, I think hopes to achieve is that anything involving hate can never be normalized. That there has to be a kind of objective overview of hate. And this documentary series attempts, to show that this must never be considered a normal thing. And also that the brain is a very supple, amazing organ. And the brain is very pliable, it's very elastic. Even though the frontal cortex stops growing at 25 years old, the brain can change. It's a changeable system, which essentially means that hate can be unlearned.
If I could follow up on that just a bit, you know, one of the things that I found most interesting was that the whole idea of the appeal of terror, for example, often does not start as, for example, if you're recruiting for ISIS, they don't say, come kill with us. The appeal is always about love, about a sense of higher purpose, about a sense of belonging to a group, this idea of tribalism. So the hate actually starts with love. And so it's that process of believing that the end justifies the means that allows people to do the most horrendous things while imagining that they're doing something magnificent and good. And that's the thing that is the most dangerous.
The first day, the prisoners were picked up unexpectedly by the police, and that put them, most of them, in a state of shock. They were humiliated, they were stripped naked, they were deloused.
And the idea, as told by Zimbardo, is that having assigned them to those two roles, he stands back and observes what is going to happen. And his question is, what were the conditions that would lead people to oppress, to hate, to brutalize other people? And what he observes and what he reports is that over this course of the study, 6 days, the guards become increasingly brutal towards the prisoners. They oppress them.
Welcome back, 5704.
If we want to find hope somewhere, where to look for it?
In all of us. I think the hope is in all of us. I think that's the point. You know, going back to what Stephen just said, we're hardwired in some ways to hate. We're hardwired to be tribal, but we're also hardwired to be flexible. And we're also hardwired with an extraordinary intellect to be able to engage in critical thinking, to understand that while we may be subject to spasmodic emotional thinking, that we're also capable of overriding it. We're capable of being better. That's the hope. And in a way, that's my greatest hope for the series, is that it gets it out to everybody. It's not particular. We dealt with stories that were all over the world as if to say to everybody, we're all like each other, and it's up to us to understand that we have the capacity for hate, each and every one of us, so that we can overcome it.
And we also have a responsibility never to be bystanders when hate is happening to others right in front of us. Well, I just, you know, I would love, for one thing, every episode ends with hope. You know, I believe every single segment of the series has solutions. So it's not just a condemnation of those who hate and those who are essentially are them versus us. You know, there's a middle ground. You know, and I'm really hoping that people will see when they see the series that the middle ground happens to just be about one thing: creating conversation. Talking about the things we share in common, not just the things that divide us, that will bring eventually people together.
Each of these groups has a very clear strategy to engage those that aren't yet their hardcore base, and then also to undermine those that oppose them. And they have tools at their disposal that enables them to reach audiences around the world in nanoseconds. But we have those tools too. We need businesses involved, cities involved, organizations. We need credible voices, we need influencers. We need to have a whole society response to this. And I believe we can turn the tide.
In the case of documentary, that's always the situation. You always start with a plan, and you start going down a road, but you always have to be prepared to take the road less taken, or take the road that seems to be drawing you in a certain direction. That's the glory of documentary. The script gets written at the end instead of the beginning.
Were there any surprises for you when we were watching the whole series, when it was ready?
I guess what surprised me is it actually increased my love for humankind. I got to the end of the series, and I really saw hope for all of us.
I feel exactly the same way. And indeed, the directors both said the same thing to me, that going down the path of making this series, as much as we investigated the horrors of hate, we found in individual stories and also collective stories this sense of hope that was tremendously uplifting, and also gave us a sense of community that was quite powerful. So I hope that the watching of the series will have the same effect on viewers as it had on those making it.
What was the most shocking experience for you when you were listening to all these testimonies?
I don't know if there was a shocking moment, but the young woman who comes out of a place of hate to be
ambassador.
An ambassador of love was one of the more interesting stories to me. That and the former sort of white supremacist gang member, Frank, who comes out and becomes, and he turns inside out. He's able to see. It's those stories to me of human flexibility that are the most moving and powerful.
Yeah, for me too, the stories of dehumanization and then the stories of being de-radicalized were the ones that were powerful for me.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure talking to you. Great pleasure and great TV series. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.